March 22nd, 1943. Morning. The small village of Khatyn awakens, and 3 hours later ceases to exist. Imagine an ordinary spring day in Belarus. The sun rises as usual. Children run outside, and the voices of women preparing breakfast can be heard. Roosters crow. Smoke billows from chimneys. It's a living world, full of ordinary people with ordinary problems. Some are thinking about work, some about what to cook for dinner, some are dreaming of the time when the war will end. No one knows that this is the last day of their lives. Meanwhile, a few kilometers away, a column is moving. These aren't just soldiers, they're death machines. These are people who have come with orders. They're eating bread and butter, drinking coffee from thermoses, discussing the weather. For them, it's just another operation, another day at war. They don't think about what will happen in a few hours. An order is an order, and that's enough. The story of Khatyn is more than just a war story. It's a story of how a system can turn ordinary people into instruments of genocide. It's a story of how one mistake, one shootout, can cost the lives of hundreds of innocent people. It's a story of how the world lost not only lives but also an entire village, leaving only a name and pain. Every year people come to Khatyn to remember. They hear the bell ringing every 30 seconds. 30 seconds for every minute of that tragedy. They see bronze figures symbolizing pain and despair. They read the names of the 149 people who died that day. And each time they ask one question: why? But before we answer this question, we need to understand the context. We need to understand what happened in Belarus in 1943. We need to understand why the Germans were so cruel, why they burned entire villages, why they killed children. Because only by understanding the context can we truly grasp the scale of the Khatyn tragedy. 1943 was one of the bloodiest periods of World War II. It was the year the war reached its peak of brutality. On the Eastern Front, the Germans were losing ground, the Red Army was advancing, and this made the occupiers even more brutal. They knew it would soon be over, but they didn't want to surrender. They feared the partisans, they feared the local population, they feared the future. The village of Khatyn was an ordinary Belarusian village. It stood in the Logoisk district, not far from Minsk. It had 26 houses and a population of approximately 150. The people here lived a simple life: farming, raising livestock, and raising children. They dreamed of peace, of the day when the war would end. But that dream would never come true. Khatyn's fate was decided beyond its borders. It was decided in the general's offices, in the orders that passed down the chain of command. It was decided by one mistake on the road, one firefight, one dead officer. And now the entire village would pay for that mistake. Such was the logic of war, such was the logic of occupation, such was the logic of genocide. 1943. Belarus is burning. This is not a metaphor. The country is literally engulfed in the flames of war. On the territory of one of the most developed Soviet republics, something is unfolding that can only be described as hell. The German occupation has been going on for almost 2 years, and in those 2 years, the land has absorbed so much blood that it seemed impossible to bear anymore. But war knows no bounds to cruelty. It could always get worse. Imagine a map of Belarus in 1943. 9 out of 10 villages are under German occupation. Every village has an occupation administration. Every village has informers. Every village is afraid. People walk the streets with their heads down, afraid to look each other in the eye because they don't know which of their neighbors is working for the Germans. Denunciations have become currency. Silence has become a crime. Talk has become a weapon. But in the forests, swamps, and underground caves, the partisans created an entire republic. It was a second power, a power that refused to recognize the German occupation. The partisans sabotaged railways, attacked German convoys, and organized uprisings. They were a symbol of resistance, a symbol that the human spirit cannot be broken even by the most brutal war machine. But Hitler and his generals couldn't afford to tolerate the partisans. Every successful partisan raid was a humiliation for them, every killed German soldier a challenge to their authority. So they issued an order. For every killed German soldier, 100 local residents would be shot. For every partisan raid, an entire village would be burned. For every act of resistance, genocide. This was the logic of terror. It was a logic built on a simple idea. If you're afraid, if you see yourself facing death, you'll collaborate with the occupiers. You'll betray the partisans because you fear for your life and the life of your family. You'll become an informer, a collaborator, a murderer, because that's the only way to survive. But the logic of terror often backfires. Instead of breaking resistance, terror strengthens it. Instead of forcing people to cooperate, it makes them hate the occupiers even more. And this was precisely the case in Belarus. Every burned village, every executed family, every destroyed hamlet, a new fighter in the partisan ranks. By 1943, more than 200 partisan detachments were active in Belarus. They controlled vast territories, created semi-autonomous zones, and established Soviet power where the Germans could not reach. They distributed leaflets, organized meetings, and elected councils. This was a true revolution in partisan warfare, not just sabotage and attacks, but an attempt to create an alternative power structure. The Germans understood this. They saw that the regular occupation administration was no longer working. They saw that their power was crumbling. And so they decided to resort to even more brutal methods. They created special battalions composed of collaborators, former Soviet citizens who had agreed to serve the Nazis. These battalions became the cruelest, most merciless instruments of the occupation. One such battalion was called the 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion. Its ranks included Ukrainian nationalists, former Red Army soldiers, deserters, and people who believed Nazi propaganda or simply wanted to survive. For them, the war wasn't an ideological struggle, but a matter of survival. For them, in order to burn down a village was simply a job they had to do to earn their pay and stay alive. These people had no moral or ethical restraints. They killed children, women, and the elderly without the slightest remorse. For them, the local population was the enemy because the occupation administration declared them to be. They carried out orders without question because questioning them could have cost them their lives. They were cogs in a vast machine of mass murder, and this machine worked relentlessly, day after day, week after week. The spring of 1943 was the heyday of the partisan movement. It was the moment when it seemed the occupation might be overthrown, the local population might revolt, and the Germans might be driven out of Belarus. But it was also the time when the Germans and their collaborators decided to strike a final blow, a final attempt to crush the resistance. And Khatyn became one of the victims of this final, most brutal wave of repression. March 21st, 1943. Evening. A road near the village of Khatyn. A German convoy passed through here. Vehicles loaded with ammunition and food, heading for the Logoisk area. The convoy was important, carrying supplies for the garrisons holding the occupied territories. These were vital cargoes, and the Germans guarded the convoy meticulously because they knew the partisans were everywhere. But that day, the partisans were truly everywhere. They were in the forest, they were on the road, they were ready. From the darkness of the forest, the first shots rang out. The partisans attacked the convoy. It was an ambush, well organized, well planned. The Germans began firing back. Grenades exploded. The earth shook from the blasts. This was war, real, brutal, bloody war. During this firefight, an officer was killed. It was an officer of the 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion, a commander, or a senior sergeant. The exact details of the story vary, but the fact was one: a German officer was dead. For the occupiers, this was a humiliation. For them, it was a challenge. For them, it was a signal that they were losing control, that their authority was crumbling, that the partisans were growing stronger. When the partisans disappeared into the forest, the Germans were left with the officer's corpse and a sense of humiliation. They turned their attention to the nearby villages. It was there, they were sure, that the partisans were hiding. It was there, they were sure, that the local population was helping the partisans. It was there that they needed to strike their revenge. The occupiers' logic was simple and terrifying. If partisans were operating near a village, it meant the village was harboring them. If the village was harboring them, it meant it was the enemy. If the village was the enemy, it must be destroyed. It didn't matter that women, children, and the elderly lived in the village. It didn't matter that most villagers had never seen partisans and weren't aware of the attack on the convoy. The logic of the occupation left no room for such nuances. The logic was simple: kill suspects, burn villages, spread fear. And Khatyn wasn't the execution site by chance. Khatyn was there because it was nearby. Khatyn was there because its name was on the list of villages to be inspected. Khatyn was there because an order came down from above, and someone decided that this village would be an example to the entire population of what happens when you collaborate with the partisans. The order was given immediately. It was an order without hesitation, without attempting to understand, without attempting to investigate. It was an order based on one simple fact: the officer was dead, the village was close, the village would be punished. The order traveled up the chain of command, down to the 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion, and there it was met with eagerness. For these men, the order was law. For them, it was an order to burn the village, shoot the inhabitants, wipe it off the face of the earth. No one asked. Perhaps we should conduct an investigation? Perhaps we should find out whether the village helped the partisans? Perhaps we should distinguish the guilty from the innocent? No one asked these questions because the logic of war had no place for such questions. The logic of occupation held only one truth: power is maintained by fear, fear is maintained by cruelty, cruelty is maintained by orders. The night of March 21st, 22 was peaceful in Khatyn. People slept, unaware of the attack on the convoy, unaware of the officer's death, unaware that their lives were about to end. They slept peacefully because they were innocent. They had committed no crime. They hadn't helped the partisans. They were simply living. And for simply living, they would be killed. The morning of March 22nd began like any other morning. The sun rose over the Belarusian forests. Birds began to sing. People woke up and prepared for a new day. No one thought about death. No one imagined that this would be their last day. The story of Khatyn was destined to unfold on this day, a story that would be remembered for centuries, a story that would become a symbol of all the atrocities of the occupation, a symbol of how war kills the innocent. March 22nd, 1943, morning, around 9 o'clock. The residents of Khatyn are waking up to a new day, as they have 1,000 times before. Some are already up, others are still in bed. Mothers are preparing breakfast. Fathers are getting ready for work in the fields. Children are playing in the yard. It's an ordinary day, just like all the other days of their lives. No one senses the approaching disaster. No one hears the sound of death coming their way. And then it appears, a column of vehicles, trucks, cars, motorcycles. They drive along the road, raising clouds of dust. The people in the back of the vehicles are German soldiers and Ukrainian collaborators from the 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion. They eat busily, without rushing. For them, this is just another operation, another day of work. They don't think about the people they're about to meet. They think only of the orders. Find the village, check documents, find the partisans, punish the population. The convoy enters Khatyn. The vehicles stop. Germans and Ukrainians jump out of the backs. They carry rifles, machine guns, and grenades. Their faces are serious, focused. These are professionals, people who have done this many times before in other villages. They know how it works. They know how to proceed to ensure the operation goes smoothly. Residents of Khatyn see cars driving in. They see soldiers, weapons, death masks on the faces of the executioners. Fear grips the village. People come out of their houses, asking each other what's going on. Women grab their children. Old people clamp their lips shut. Everyone knows this can only mean one thing: an inspection, a raid, maybe even a crackdown. An officer steps out of the first car. He issues orders in German, his words repeated by Ukrainian translators. The order is the same, repeated in dozens of villages. All residents must gather in the central square for a document check. This is standard procedure, they say. No big deal, just a check. People obediently leave their homes. They follow orders because they're used to obeying. They don't know it's a trap. They don't know they're walking to their deaths. They think it's a routine check, that they'll be released later, that they'll return home. They believe it's just a police raid, nothing special. The old men walk slowly, leaning on sticks. Women hold their children's hands. The young men walk with a sense of unease, but they keep their composure because they see officers watching them, ready to open fire at the slightest resistance. The children don't understand what's happening. They walk because their mothers are pulling them by the hand. They think this is some kind of game, that something interesting is about to happen. More than 150 people had gathered in the central square. The entire village population, young and old. The Germans formed a semicircle around them, rifles ready to fire. An officer began checking documents. He approached each person, demanded to see their documents, and checked them. His face remained stony. He showed no emotion. For him, this was routine. But during this check, something becomes clear. The officer receives some kind of signal. Perhaps he receives an order over the radio. Perhaps one of his men whispers something in his ear. His face changes. He says something. His voice grows louder, more stern. The residents of Khatyn hear this change in tone, and the fear they were feeling becomes even more acute. The officer gives a new order. All residents must go to the barn, a large granary located in the center of the village. It's a grain storage facility, a wooden building with narrow windows and a single large door. The villagers begin to realize something is wrong. Some try to protest, but they are met with shouts and threats of guns. "Go, or we'll shoot," they hear. People slowly begin to move toward the barn. Mothers clutch their children to their chests. Old people tremble with fear. Young people look for an escape route, but there is none. Armed men stand on all sides. The village, which just hours ago was vibrant and cheerful, is now becoming a place of death. Every step toward the barn is a step into hell. Every step is a step into eternity. The barn fills with people. They stand close together, uncomfortably, in fear. The windows close, the door locks from the inside. The Germans stand guard. There is no longer any chance to escape. There is no longer any chance to save their lives. The people understand what will happen next. They have heard stories of other villages, of burned villages, of the dead. And now they understand that this is their story, their end. Outside the barn, the executioners begin their work. This is not haste. This is not chaos. This is methodical, cold-blooded murder. German soldiers and Ukrainian collaborators begin lining the barn with straw. They take bundles of straw, spread them around the wooden building, stack them against the walls, lean them against the roof. This is preparation for the burning. This is preparation for the hellish ritual that is about to take place. Inside the barn, people hear what's happening. They hear the soldiers' voices. They hear the sounds of the straw strands being thrown to the ground. They begin to understand the truth. This isn't just an inspection. This isn't just a search. This is the end. A mother hugs her child even tighter. An old man falls to his knees and prays. A young man punches the wall in despair. But no one can do anything. They're trapped. They're defenseless. They're doomed. The executioners continue. They open gasoline canisters. They pour gasoline on the straw, turning it into a giant torch of death. The smell of gasoline penetrates the barn through the cracks in the walls, through the cracks in the floor. People understand what is about to happen. They begin to panic. Some run to the door, trying to open it, but the door will not budge. Some begin to scream, calling for mercy, for humanity, for God. But no one hears their cries. No one will come to their aid. And then the first shot rings out. It's a shot in the air, the signal to begin. It sounds like the signal from hell. After this shot, the executioners set the straw on fire. The fire flares up instantly. It engulfs the walls of the barn. It rises. It grows higher, larger, more powerful. Fire is a living being. It breathes. It grows. It consumes everything in its path. Inside the barn, a nightmare begins. The temperature rises instantly. The wooden walls begin to smolder, then catch fire. The roof becomes an oven. People realize they are dying. They try to cover their faces with their hands, but it doesn't help. Smoke fills the room. People suffocate. Their lungs burn from the smoke. Their eyes water. Their throats burn. The screams begin. These are not ordinary screams. These are screams of pain, despair, horror. Mothers scream, clutching their dead children to their chests. Children scream, calling for mom, calling for dad, calling for help that will never come. Old people scream in pain, in fear of death. Young people scream in rage, in helplessness, in hatred. Everyone screams. Everyone begs for mercy. Everyone begs for death, just to get rid of the pain quickly. People start beating on the walls. They try to break through them with their fists, their feet, anything. Their fists leave traces of blood on the burning wood. Their bones break on the wooden logs. But nothing helps. The walls remain intact. The fire continues to burn. The smoke becomes thicker. People fall to the floor, suffocating, dying. The roof begins to collapse. It falls slowly, piece by piece. As the pieces of the roof fall on the people, they let out their last screams. It is the sound of death, a sound that is never forgotten, a sound that echoes in people's memories for centuries. Outside, the executioners stand and watch the burning barn. They hear screams, they see fire, they see smoke, but their faces are emotionless. For them, this is work. For them, this is an order to be carried out. Some smoke, some talk, some laugh. They are indifferent to the pain unfolding before their eyes. But the fire doesn't wait. People panic, looking for a way out. Some find cracks in the walls and try to crawl through them to escape. Their bodies, charred and covered in burns, emerge from the burning building. They run out into the street, screaming, trying to put out the fire on their bodies, trying to save themselves. But there's no escape. As soon as people run out of the barn, they're met with bullets. The punitive forces stand in a semicircle around the building, and as people run out, they open fire. This isn't war. This isn't a fair fight. This is murder. People fall as they run. Children fall, Mothers fall, old people fall. Corpses remain on the ground, charred, bullet-ridden, dead. The torment lasts a long time. The fire burns, people burn, the executioners shoot. It seems like an eternity, although in reality, it lasts only a few hours. When the fire finally goes out, when silence finally falls, the village of Khatyn ceases to exist. In its place remain only ashes, bones, blood, and pain. This is how a village dies. This is how people die. This is how the world ends. Amidst the ashes and pain, among the dead and dying, there was one life miraculously preserved. It was a blacksmith named Iosif Kaminsky. He was one of the few adult men in the village, a strong, resilient man who had worked with fire and metal his entire life. His hands were covered in burns, his body hardened by years of work in the forge. But even his strength and experience couldn't save him from the hell that unfolded in Khatyn. When the fire engulfed the barn, Joseph was inside with his family. He was holding his son, 12-year-old Adam. Adam was practically a grown boy now, helping his father in the forge, dreaming of a future. But that future would never come. When the roof began to collapse, when the fire became unbearable, Joseph shielded his son with his body, trying to protect him from the flames. It was a father's instinct, a desire to save his child at any cost. But the price was too high. During one of the explosions, one of the collapses of the burning beams, Joseph lost consciousness. He was struck, he fell, everything went dark. When he came to, he was lying in ashes. His body was charred, his skin was blackened, his clothes were burned away. But he was breathing. He was alive. It was a miracle. It was unbelievable. But it was true. Joseph understood what had happened. He knew his son was dead. When he lost consciousness, Adam was left alone in the fire. The boy couldn't escape, couldn't save himself. Adam burned alive, and Joseph was forced to leave his body in the flames. It was a pain that far exceeded the physical pain of the burns. It was the pain of loss, a pain that would never go away, a pain that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Joseph tried to get up. His legs could barely support him. His eyes couldn't see because of the smoke and pain. But he stood up. He began to crawl along the ground, among the corpses, among the ashes, among the horror. Around him were about 150 dead bodies. Mothers with children, old people, young people, all were dead. Their bodies were charred, mangled, unrecognizable. This was not peace. It was a picture of hell. Joseph climbed out of the pile of corpses. He stood on the ground, charred, almost dead, but alive. Why was he alive? Why, of all these people, had he survived? This question would haunt him for the rest of his life. Perhaps it was God's will. Perhaps it was fate. Perhaps it was just luck. But the result was the same. Joseph Kaminsky was the only survivor of the barn. The executioners saw him. They saw a charred man standing among the ruins. They raised their rifles, ready to finish him off. But something happened. Perhaps the officer gave the order to leave him alone. Perhaps they mistook him for dead. Perhaps there was some other reason. But no shots were fired. Joseph remained alive. Later, after the war, Joseph recounted how he escaped the village. He ran into the forest, despite the pain, despite the wounds, despite the despair. He knew the Germans were looking for survivors to kill. He knew that every living person from Khatyn was a witness, and the witnesses had to be eliminated. But Joseph was persistent. He made his way through the forest, day after day, week after week, until he found the partisans. The partisans sheltered him. They treated his wounds. They gave him food. They gave him what was so important at that moment. They gave him the chance to live. Yosef joined the partisans. He took up arms and began to fight. He fought against the Germans. He fought against the collaborators. He fought for the memory of his son, for the memory of all the people who died in Khatyn. After the war, Joseph survived. He lived a long life. He saw the world restored after the war. But the pain never went away. The pain of losing his son, the pain of losing his village, the pain of what he had seen. This pain stayed with him his entire life. When the Khatyn Memorial was unveiled in 1969, Yosef was invited to participate in the ceremony. And when the memorial was unveiled, when people saw the central figure, a sculpture of a man holding a dead child, they realized it was Yosef Kaminsky. It was his pain, his despair, his love for his son, which sculptor Sergei Selikonov embodied in bronze. The figure was called the Unconquered Man, and the name was entirely appropriate. Yosef was unconquered. War could not break him. Pain could not destroy him. He remained a man, remained a father, remained a witness to history. Yosef Kaminsky died in 1984 at the age of nearly 70. But his image remains, his pain remains, his story remains, and everyone who comes to the Khatyn Memorial sees his figure, sees his love for his dead son, sees his despair and his defiance. And everyone understands that this is not just a sculpture. It is a life. It is a story. It is the pain of one man, which embodies the pain of an entire village, the pain of an entire nation. 149 people. This number sounds simple, just a number in a historical document. But behind this number stands every life, every name, every story, every dream that will never come true. 149 people died in Khatyn in a matter of hours. 149 lives cut short by fire, smoke, and bullets. 149 people who will never return home, never see their loved ones, never have their affairs completed. But this number doesn't tell the whole story, because among these 149 people were 75 children. 75 children under 16. These are children who had not yet lived. These are children who had not known war until the moment the barn caught fire. These are children who dreamed of a future that would never come. 75 children who will never know what love is, will never know what a dream is, will never know what life is. Imagine this. Of the 149 people who died in Khatyn, half were children. Think about it. Half the village was made up of children. That means almost entire families were wiped out. Mothers with children, fathers with children, grandparents with grandchildren, they all died together. Entire families were wiped off the face of the earth overnight. But the number 149 still doesn't tell the full story, because there were names. Each of those 149 people had a name, a personality, a story. There was 8-year-old Mashenka, who loved to draw. There was 9-year-old Sasha, who dreamed of becoming a mechanic. There was 20-year-old Tanya, who was about to get married. There were old people who had seen the Russian Empire, the revolution, Soviet power, the war. And now all they saw was fire. The village of Khatyn was completely destroyed. This doesn't just mean that people were killed. It means that the village, as an organism, was killed. The culture was killed. History was killed. Memory was killed. 26 houses were burned. The farm was destroyed. The cemetery was devastated. Everything that made up the village was destroyed. And the most horrifying thing about this is that it wasn't the only such village. This wasn't a unique phenomenon. It was a systematic policy of the occupation authorities. More than 600 villages were burned in Belarus. 600 villages. This means that Khatyn was not an exception, but the rule. This means that the tragedy that occurred in Khatyn was repeated hundreds of times, in hundreds of villages, with hundreds of thousands of victims. If the average number of people killed in each village is the same as in Khatyn, then the total number of victims is in the hundreds of thousands. These are people, mothers, fathers, children, the elderly, all killed simply as a side effect of war, as part of a policy of terror, as a means of suppressing the population. This is not a war. This is not combat. This is genocide. This is the deliberate extermination of a civilian population. Belarus lost approximately 3 million people during World War II. This was the highest percentage loss of population among all Soviet republics. This means that 1 in 3 Belarusians died during the war. 1 in 3. This isn't just a number. It's a catastrophe, a tragedy of unimaginable scale. And each of these 3 million lives was connected to the same story as the story of Khatyn. Each of these lives was a person with their own dream, their own love, their own life. Each of these lives was stolen by war, stolen by occupation, stolen by weapons and fire. These are not numbers. These are people. These are mothers who never hugged their children. These are children who never saw their fathers. These are dreams that never came true. The scale of the crime is hard to comprehend when you look at the numbers. 149 people, 75 children, 600 villages, 3 million lives. These numbers sound abstract. They sound like statistics. They sound like mere numbers. But behind every number lies human pain, human suffering, human death. And when you understand this, when you truly imagine this pain, then it becomes clear that this is not just a story. It is a judgment on all of humanity. It is a reminder of how far cruelty can go when it becomes systemic, when it becomes policy, when it becomes an order from above. Khatyn is a symbol. It's a symbol of all the burned villages, all the murdered people, all the stolen lives. It's a symbol that war knows no boundaries, that it kills not only soldiers, but also women, children, and the elderly. It's a symbol that evil knows no bounds, that it can be organized, structured, and systematized. And it's a symbol that the memory of this must live forever, because only memory can prevent such a thing from happening again. The war ended in 1945. The Germans were defeated, they fled, their empire collapsed. The Red Army liberated Belarus, Soviet power returned, and reconstruction began. But for the victims, the war was not over. For the survivors, the war continued in their dreams, in their memories, in their wounded souls, and the question of justice remained open. Who will be punished for Khatyn? Who will be punished for the burned villages? Who will be punished for the murdered children? The 118th Schutzmannschaft Battalion didn't simply disappear after the war. Its men didn't simply vanish into thin air. They fled. They hid. They tried to start new lives under new names, in other countries, in other cities. Some of them fled to the west, to the American occupation zone. Some tried to blend in with the civilian population, to become invisible, to forget their past. But the past is never completely forgotten. Traces always remain. Witnesses always emerge. The Soviet security agencies launched a hunt. The KGB, the Army counterintelligence, and investigators were all deployed to find the culprits. It was a protracted hunt that lasted decades. Some were found quickly, others years later. Information came from various sources: survivors, witnesses, and defectors. Slowly but surely, a picture began to emerge. The killers were identified. Their locations were established. Plans for their capture began to be formulated. In the 1960s, the first wave of trials began. These weren't just trials. They were tribunals where society demanded justice. In the Soviet Union, in German courts, in Poland, wherever participants in the crimes could be found, trials were held. The people who committed the murders in Khatyn began to stand trial. The people who gave the orders, who carried them out, who stood guard while the village burned, all began to answer for their crimes. The trials in Minsk were particularly significant. In the 1970s, a series of trials were held there against members of the 118th Battalion. Former collaborators, people who had served the Germans, people who had participated in the murder of civilians, they all stood trial. The court heard testimony from survivors, examined documents, and reviewed evidence. And the court handed down verdicts. Many of them received life sentences. This meant they would sit in prison for the rest of their lives, reminded daily of their crimes, and living with the knowledge that they had killed innocent people. For some, this was untrue, because no sentence could compensate for the deaths of hundreds of people. But it was what the Soviet system could offer: justice, however imperfect, however belated. Some criminals were never found. They died in their beds, in their homes, in other countries, never answering for their crimes. They lived their lives. They had families. They had grandchildren. They lived as if nothing had happened. For their victims, this was a special injustice. They were dead, and the killers moved on, enjoying life, forgetting their past. But there is a fundamental difference between the Soviet and German positions. The Soviet Union recognized Khatyn as a crime, acknowledged that it was murder, and recognized that those responsible must be punished. The Germans, however, long denied their responsibility, or at least minimized it. For them, Khatyn was simply a military operation, a necessary measure in the fight against partisans, collateral damage from the war. They didn't see it as a crime against humanity. They didn't see it as genocide. This difference in position persists to this day. For Russia, Belarus, and the countries that suffered under the German occupation, Khatyn is a symbol of the crimes of Nazism, a symbol of what the Nazi regime was punished for. For the West, it is often viewed as simply part of the history of the war, one of many incidents, part of the overall context of military action. But the point is that the truth was established. The point is that the guilty were found and punished, even if not all of them. The point is that memory was preserved, that history was not forgotten, that memory was documented and passed on to future generations. This was important work, the work of investigators, prosecutors, judges, the work of survivors who testified, the work of historians who studied the archives. And all this was done not for revenge, not to rekindle hatred. It was done to remember, to ensure that such a thing would never happen again. It was the work of justice, the work of memory, the work of history. And though it was imperfect, though it could not bring back the dead, it was important. It was necessary. 1969. 26 years have passed since the tragedy. 26 years of pain. 26 years of remembering the dead. 26 years of trying to understand how to live on after such a tragedy. And now, finally, the time has come to create a place where this memory will live on forever. They decided to build a memorial on the site of the village of Khatyn. Not just a monument, not just a statue, but an entire complex that would reflect the scale of the tragedy and the endlessness of the pain. Architect Lev Selikonov and sculptor Sergei Selikonov, brothers, dedicated themselves to this project. They understood that this wasn't just a job. It was dealing with tragedy, dealing with pain, dealing with memory. They arrived at the site of the village of Khatyn and saw emptiness. In place of 26 houses, there was nothing. Only earth, only silence, only the wind that carried the memory of the dead. And so they began to build. First, a master plan for the memorial was developed. It was a plan that reflected the idea that every home, every family, every life is important and should be remembered. Therefore, it was decided to erect something in place of each house that would symbolize this life, this loss, this pain. At the site of each house, a bronze plaque was installed. Each plaque bears the name of the head of the family that lived in that house, along with the number of family members who perished in that house. Just facts, just names, just numbers. But each plaque represents an entire story, an entire life, an entire family that was destroyed. And most importantly, a bell was installed on each slab. A white metal bell, a bell that rings every 30 seconds. It sounds strange. It sounds like some kind of unnecessary detail. But in fact, it's brilliant. Because 30 seconds is the time for one person. That is, the bell rings 30 seconds for every minute, for every dead person. 30 seconds of ringing signifies one life. And if there were 149 people in Khatyn, then this means that if you stand at the memorial and listen to the bells ring, then every 149 minutes the dead people pass by, as if telling their stories. But the ringing of bells isn't the only thing that creates the memorial's atmosphere. The memorial was designed so that the landscape itself, nature itself, contributes to this atmosphere. The memorial often features fog and smoke rising from the ground. This symbolizes the fire that burned Khatyn. It's the smoke of the past that never goes away, forever lingering over this place. At the center of the memorial is the main sculpture, the unconquered man. It is the figure of a man, burned and wounded, but standing tall. In his arms is a dead boy. This is Joseph Kaminsky and his son, Adam. It is the image of a father holding a dead child, an image of pain, an image of despair, but also an image of defiance, an image of the invincibility of the human spirit. The figure is made of bronze, towering over the memorial, visible from afar, looking to the sky, as if calling for justice, as if asking that such a thing never happen again. Next to the main sculpture is a wall of remembrance. The names of all 149 people who died in Khatyn are inscribed on this wall. Just names, nothing more. Each name represents a person. Each name represents a life. Each name represents a story. People come to this wall and search for the names of their relatives, their ancestors. They touch the names, they cry, they pray, they remember. The memorial was built without unnecessary embellishment, without loud slogans, without political propaganda. This was done deliberately. The memorial's creators understood that pain needs no embellishment, that memory needs no slogans. Memory needs silence. Memory needs space. Memory needs everyone who comes here to feel the pain, to hear the voices of the dead, to understand the scale of the tragedy. When the memorial opened in 1969, thousands came to honor the memory of the dead. People came to remember. People came to cry. People came to ensure that the memory of Khatyn would never be forgotten. And since that day, every year, every month, every day, people come to Khatyn. They come with flowers. They come with prayers. They come with tears. And the bells continue to ring. Every 30 seconds, one life, one memory, one ringing that reminds us of the pain of the past. The Khatyn Memorial has become a symbol of all the burned villages, a symbol of all the dead, a symbol of the enduring memory. It's not just a place, it's a sacred place, a place where the living and the dead meet, where memory connects with the future. It's a place that makes people think, that makes people remember, that makes people never forget the price of war, the price of cruelty, the price of oblivion. The announcer speaks calmly, almost in a whisper. His voice is barely audible, but each word feels like a blow to the heart. Khatyn has become a symbol, he says, and in his voice you can hear all the pain of the world, all the sadness of history, all the tragedy of humanity. Khatyn has become a symbol of all those burned for someone else's war, a symbol of the fact that evil needs no reason, it only needs an order. Footage of the memorial flashes before my eyes. bronze figures in the fog, the ringing of a bell, which sounds every 30 seconds, like the heartbeat of the dead, like the pulse of memory that never ceases. A cold fog covers the memorial. Smoke rises from the ground, seemingly never dissipating. This is the smoke of the past, which will always be here, always a reminder of what happened. The silhouettes of the trees growing around the memorial seem like people standing and praying, remembering, not forgetting. Nature itself becomes a memorial, itself a voice for the dead. The central sculpture, Unconquered Man, stands at the center of the memorial, its silhouette visible through the fog. A father holds a dead child in his arms. The father's face expresses pain, but also a refusal to break, a refusal to forget, a refusal to allow this crime to remain unpunished in the hearts of people. Everyone who sees this sculpture sees more than just art. They see pain, they see history, they see a reason to live on, to remember, and to pass on this memory to the next generation. The ringing of the bells grows louder, more intense. It's not just the sound of metal, it's the voice of the past, the cry of the dead, the prayer of the living. Each ringing represents one life, one person, one moment of eternity. And if you stand at the memorial long enough, you can hear all 149 lives, all 149 prayers, all 149 cries for justice, for remembrance, for something like this never to happen again. The scenes pass slowly. There are slabs with names, with numbers, with photographs of the families who once lived in these houses. Each slab represents an entire story, an entire life, an entire world that was destroyed. People who come to these slabs search for the names of their relatives, their ancestors, their loved ones. They touch the names, they cry, they pray, they remember. And the memorial serves as a testament to the fact that these people once lived, that they were important, that their deaths mattered. The screen reads, March 22, 1943. This is the date of the tragedy, a date that should live in our memories forever. This is the date that divided time into two parts, before and after. Before Khatyn and after Khatyn. Before the tragedy and after the tragedy. This date marks the end of one world and the beginning of another. And then the next sign appears, 149. It's just a number, but this number contains all the pain, all the tragedy, all the injustice. 149 people, 149 lives, 149 reasons to remember, 149 reasons to cry, 149 reasons to fight to ensure that this never happens again. And then, among them were 75 children. This inscription strikes the heart more than anything else, because it's not just a number, it's a fact that reveals the full extent of the crime, the full extent of the tragedy, the full extent of the injustice. 75 children. Innocent children who didn't know war, who didn't know about partisans, who didn't know about politics, who simply wanted to live. And they were killed, burned, destroyed. The bell's ringing grows louder, seeming to ring from all sides, surrounding you, penetrating your soul. It's the ringing of pain, the ringing of memory, the ringing of a history that must never be forgotten. And in that ringing, you can hear a prayer that such a thing will never happen again, a prayer that people will remember, a prayer that justice will be restored. The footage of the memorial fades, the fog thickens. The bell's ringing becomes quieter, but still audible, as if it were coming from deep within the earth, from deep within memory, from deep within history. And then, black screen, total darkness. But in this darkness, the bell's ringing can still be heard. It is the ringing of memory that never ceases, that will never be forgotten. The final words appear on the black screen. Memory is our responsibility. And it's true. Memory isn't just the past. It's our responsibility to those who died, to those who survived, to those who will yet be born. Memory is a vow that we will not allow such a thing to happen again. Memory is a fight against oblivion, against the evil being forgotten and repeated. Khatyn is more than just a village that was burned in 1943. Khatyn is a symbol, a monument to all the victims of war, all the burned villages, all the murdered children, all the stolen lives. Khatyn is the voice of the past speaking to us in the present. Remember. Remember the pain. Remember justice. Remember that war is evil. Remember that life is the most precious thing in the world. And every year people come to Khatyn. They come with flowers. They come with prayers. They come with tears. And the bells ring. Every 30 seconds is one life. Every ringing is one prayer. Every prayer is one memory. And this memory will live forever. Because Khatyn is not just the past, it is eternity. It is pain that never cools. It is a fire that never goes out. It is a memory that will never be forgotten. The bell's ringing fades, but the sound remains. It remains in the heart of everyone who has heard this story. It remains as a reminder, as a promise, as a vow. A vow to remember, a vow to help, a vow to never let such a thing happen again. Because Khatyn is more than just history. Khatyn is our conscience, our responsibility, our memory, which does not fade and never will.